Y'all, we have to stop the fantasies. Now, I know to an extent this is something that we all do. We all have some type of fantasy that we've created for ourselves in our minds. But in the end, it doesn't do us any good. It causes us more pain and more anxiety and disappointment than as if we were to live in our reality, in the real world, in our real life. Why do we fantasize? I think that we do fantasize, to cope with pain, boredom, stress, anxieties. We use it as an escape. We use it as a form of control, in our minds. In our minds, we can control what goes on. We get to control the scenarios and the outcomes. We can control other people inside of our minds, right? But we come back to reality and it's like it hits us like a ton of bricks. Like, this is not how I imagined this in my head. Like, now I'm disappointed. And doesn't that bring you more anxiety and more stress because you're not living up to that fantasy that you've created in your mind? And most of the time, we're not going to live up to that because it's not real. It's an imagined alternate reality that we're living in. Instead of living out in the real world, in our real reality, you know what I'm saying? We have to stop. And I know it's hard, like I said, we use it as a form of escape. And we all want to escape our life sometimes. I know I want to escape my life almost every day, but I can't because this is real. This is real life, you know. And I've come to find out that when we're constantly living in this alternate reality that we've created for ourselves, it makes it harder for us to actually achieve the goals, the real life goals that we have set for ourselves because we're constantly focused on this alternate version of our life, of ourselves that we're unable to live up to. And so it's like we're stuck. We feel like this isn't going to happen because in my mind, I have imagined a whole different scenario, a whole different outcome, a whole different future for myself. You can't live up to the imagination. You'll never gonna live up to your imagination. You have to be real. You have to be realistic with yourself, with your goals. And although you might have some realistic goals that you have set forth for yourself, you might not be able to achieve those goals because you're focused on the imagined version of your goals. We have to stop, we have to become more self-aware. When we realize that I've been in my head for far too long, it's time to take a deep breath, y'all. You need to breathe. You need to use those techniques, the techniques that you've used for your anxiety. Count 5 things that you see in front of you. What are you smelling in this very moment? What are you seeing in this very moment? What are you feeling? Maybe really feel the clothing that you have on your body. And what does it feel like? Be in the moment, in your reality. We have to stop the fantasizing. We have to live in reality. And it's not going to be easy. I know it's not going to be easy, but nothing new is ever easy. When you're learning something, it's never going to be easy unless you just naturally born with that talent. And I feel like a lot of us are naturally born with a lot of talents that just come easy like that. But some of us are not, and that's okay, but we have to stop the fantasizing. Our subconscious finds it difficult to distinguish the difference between fiction and reality. Kind of like when you're going on Instagram or TikTok or any other social media platform that you like to use, and you're scrolling and you see these bodies, these specific certain type of bodies, a body that you don't have. Our subconscious is taking in every little detail, especially when we're looking at this on a daily basis. Our subconscious is taking this in and seeing it as normal. This is the norm. This is the normal human body. This is the normal human lifestyle, but we come back to reality. We look at ourselves in the mirror and it's like, what's wrong with me? This isn't normal. This isn't how I'm supposed to look. I'm supposed to have this type of body. I'm supposed to have this type of lifestyle. And I'm here to tell you that that's not the case, you know. That's not real. A lot of those bodies, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of those bodies aren't even real. They're bought. They're bought. They bought that body, you know what I'm saying? And that's just that's just not real. You know, you look in the mirror and you see that you have a normal average body, or even above average, but you're constantly looking at social media and your subconscious is taking this in as normal, and you don't have that. So you think, you know, something's wrong with you. Now you're disappointed in yourself, and now you're depressed, and now you're angry because you're different. But in reality, you're not. You're just living in something that's not real. You know, it's time to come out. You know, maybe take a step back from social media for a while. If maybe that's one of your issues, you know, take a step back. Live in your reality. Sometimes I know maybe it's just easier to just start with just this moment right now, just living in this moment right now. Well, you know, like I said, what can you see? What do you feel? You know, what do you smell? You know, just start with just living in the moment. You know, we have to stop with the fantasizes and this imagined reality, this imagined version of ourselves, of our future. You know, we're constantly imagining certain scenarios, certain outcomes, you know, certain relationships with people. And it's like we can't always control that. But in our mind, we control everything. In our subconscious, you know, just like when we're looking on social media and we're taking all of those visuals in and subconsciously looking at that as, you know, real reality, just like when we're imagining all of these scenarios, you know, all of these outcomes in this future, you know, we come back to reality and it's just like we're hit with disappointment because we're not living that. You know, we didn't get that outcome, we didn't get that reaction, we didn't get that relationship, you know. But you know, reality is not what we make it out to be in our heads. And so it's time for us to start living in our own reality. You know, start with living in the moment, you know. So that's all I wanted to say, y'all, because this is something that I have learned I struggled with my whole life, you know, because I've really been a loner. And so, like I said, I've used it as an escape, you know, I've used it as a form of control. Um, and, you know, it feels like I'm just running in circles in this life, you know, constantly living in an alternate, you know, made up reality that's not real, you know. And it's hard, you know, to achieve those goals, you know, because I'm constantly focused. You know, I feel like a lot of the issues I've had in my life has been because I've just so focused on that one thing. You know, I'm so focused on trying to get that certain body type because that's what I'm seeing. You know, I'm seeing myself as different, as bad in a way because I don't look like that. I don't look like that girl on TikTok. You know, I don't have that lifestyle that home that the girl on TikTok has, and I see myself as bad, as wrong. You know, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my life, but there's not. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with my life. You know, I'm just so focused on that one thing, and I haven't been able to actually move forward in my life because I've been so focused. And I feel like a lot of us struggle with this. You know, we're just so focused on that one thing that we've imagined, you know, that, you know, we're trying to get somewhere, but it's like we're a hamster on a wheel. We're just running in circles because it's like we're stuck in this one spot in life because we're not living in reality. We're not focused on our life. We're focused on everybody else's life or the imagined life that we have, you know? So it's time to stop. Live in the moment. Live in your reality.